you have to hear your teachers as well, because they're experiencing some anxieties about the safety. They're concerned about their safety. The
Mhm.
vaccine hasn't been put in place in several states. We are just getting access to it, although we have been face to face since the day one of school, when we started in September. So, there's just a lot of things to be anxious about. You can't just continue to operate just as if everything is normal, because that's what everyone else is doing.
School is in. But are you really ready to learn? Open your eyes to a new day in education with The Awakening Educator, a program specifically designed to explore a new, mindful way of educating our youth. Learn about social-emotional learning, new modalities of teaching, and the most relevant topics in education with your hosts, Susan Andrian and Megan Sweet. Susan and Megan will take you inside the issues by looking at them from different points of view, from policies and research to teaching models that are actually used in schools. There's never a dull moment in this classroom. Have any questions you'd like to ask? Maybe you have knowledge you'd like to share. Share your thoughts live on air. Grab a pen and paper and get ready to open your textbooks and minds to a new way of learning on The Awakening Educator.
Welcome, everyone, to The Awakening Educator. I'm Megan Sweet.
And I'm Susan Andrian.
And today we have two amazing guests that are going to first introduce themselves a little bit, and then we'll talk about the show.
Good evening, everyone. My name is Tammy Taylor, and I am a principal in South Carolina at an elementary school. I am in my 5th year as principal, and I have over 20 years of experience in education as a teacher, instructional coach, instructional coordinator, several levels of director, and again, most recently as principal, which I am absolutely loving. So thank you guys for having us.
Thank you.
And I'm Dr. Sheikah Houston. I am a middle school principal. Like Tammy, I've been in education close to 20 years. This is my 18th year. I've been a teacher, an assistant principal, going into my 5th year now as principal. Tammy and I are also the co-owners of Create and Educate LLC, where we offer professional development to school districts and schools, usually around literacy, but also with leadership coaching and implicit bias. And we also work with entrepreneurs, helping them to become vendors with school districts.
I don't even know how you are like doing both of those things. Okay, so welcome to both of you.
Thank you.
Extremely impressive careers, but to being principals during this year of all ever is tough. During this year of all years, super tough. And then to be owning a business and running a business as well is just incredibly impressive. So yeah, I need some of your energy, so I will pull that out.
I love the joy that you just brought to that too. You could hear how much you love education and how important it is. And to still feel that way after this school year is for sure a testament to your love of education.
Yeah. It's been a challenge, but it's been, and Sheikah and I talk about this quite frequently. It's been a real challenge because so many things are so different for so many people. And with us trying to manage and navigate our way through all of that, it has been difficult, but it also has been probably one of the best years for seeing how innovation can actually make a difference in the classrooms in the schools that we're in.
That's a really powerful statement. Can you give some examples of what that means to you? Because I was filling in with my mind of what that looks like.
The innovation to the classrooms, just really, I think when we were talking the other day about having to pivot in education and to see the resiliency of educators and teachers and leaders, also of the students, has been very rewarding. That even through all of this, we've had to change to the format with hybrid virtual. We've had to bring in thousands of dollars worth of plexiglass, but through it all, the teachers are still working to engage students. Students are still trying to reach the bar, with the incentives that we're putting in place. We have different little contests that we have going on. One of the band teacher talked today. We're working on making sure students stay engaged through all of this, that she's instituted band karate, and they're just really excited about trying to get to that next level of the karate belt in band. So even through all of this, the teachers have not lost their passion. They have not lost their innovation. They have not lost their drive to reach children. And that's because when your heart is really in it, that never goes away. So no matter what is going on, you're still driving, and that driving force is principles to also try to help cultivate that within your culture.
Absolutely. And I can ditto everything that Shika said, but I'll add for us, and I think it probably is consistent at her school as well, watching the kids figure out their own identity in this new space has been very encouraging as well, because it shows, and she mentioned their resiliency, but when you look at students who are behind plexiglass the entire day, and you still see that they're excited about the little things that happen in the classrooms with the teachers, and the teachers absolutely are being innovative and incredibly ingenuitive about the kinds of things that they're trying to provide the students with to keep them engaged and keep them active, even though we're having to maintain all of these safety protocols that are in place for a reason. And the kids understand and appreciate it. And it's just been a tremendous corporation, or collaboration is what Shika and I always focus on. But that collaboration has included teachers, students, and parents, because it's brand new for all of us.
Yeah.
Yesterday when we were talking, you said we had to pivot, and now the question is, are we going to pivot on the same foot, or are we going to put down a new foot? And it really it has resonated so much. I've thought about that several times throughout the day, and just sort of thinking about like how that innovation piece, and you've both shared some really good examples. How do we support so you coach, you are leaders in your own schools, but you also are coaching other leaders. And what are some of the leadership moves or coaching focus around helping all of us think about that new foot? Like, how are we training ourselves to be on a new foot? Because I do just love that visual.
Well, one of the things is basically making sure, because it's easy as leaders because of the things that we are tasked to do and the pressure that is still placed upon us by the legislature. We've talked about possibly getting a waiver in South Carolina to not state test, but our testing materials arrived today in the mail. So even through all of that, and still having to worry about state testing and what that's going to mean, that your teachers and your children are going to be judged during a time when there's been so much learning loss, you have to, as the leader, make sure that you are not operating as if it's a pandemic, even though everyone else still may be. So with that, you have to have some grace. You have to have some SEL check-ins for your teachers. You can't just continue to operate just as if everything is normal, because that's what everyone is doing. So there's, you have to hear your teachers as well, because they're experiencing some anxieties about the safety. They're concerned about their safety. The vaccine hasn't been put in place in several states. We are just getting access to it, although we have been face to face since the day one of school when we started in September. So, there's just a lot of things to be anxious about, but, we haven't really been given a lot of grace by the higher ups. So we have to create that space where teachers are allowed to express their concerns, their vulnerabilities, and, just be able to show, well, hey, I'm not okay with this, and make those concessions where needed. You don't feel really comfortable going around to provide certain interventions. Let's do this. Let's have one student sit outside the class. You've got to be able to come up with those things and help them through that, and be able to still make sure the students are getting what they need.
And I think to add to what Shika is sharing, because that's also pertinent when you think about the way we've had to put down for the pivot. But one of the things that we're also encouraging leaders to make sure they think about once we are moving forward, because right now we are in the pivot. We have seen that students can handle learning differently than what we've traditionally seen and expected from them. So we have to make a decision whether or not we're going to continue and use a progressive mindset when we establish expectations and we set up expectations for curriculum and for curriculum delivery with kids turning in assignments. We're in a whole new world of synchronous and asynchronous learning. Are we going to go back to what we knew before, or are we going to continue on this new foot? Because we see that the pandemic forced us into a certain arena, but some things we've noticed here are just good for children, and it's good for the teachers, and it's good for instruction in the classroom. So we need to make sure that as we are establishing those pivots, Susan, as we have talked about a little yesterday, we are paying attention to all those things that Shika mentioned, but we're also making sure that we are learning from these experiences, those things that we need to put into practice as we move forward.
And just to add one more thing to what Tammy just said, I was having a conversation with someone about the technology and some of the issues that have taken place during this time with technology. And when decisions were being made in some districts, some decisions were adult-centered. The ideal about, well, what software program or what platform are we going to go with was based on what the adults felt comfortable with, what they had knowledge of. When if you really looked at what the students were familiar with, Google and Google Classrooms was something that most of the kids were really familiar with. So are we going to continue to do things that are centered around adults, or are we going to do things that are in the best interest of children and how they could be most successful?
I love so much of what each of you shared just now. The first is just like the assets-based and proactive stance that you're having, which is so important, right? So I think a lot of people are sitting with the loss of what used to be and can't seem to get out of that. And I understand it. We've had a lot of loss, both of life, lifestyle, how we used to teach school, run school. But there are also a lot of opportunities there, and there are emerging stories showing that some kids actually are thriving in remote learning.
That's right.
And why would we want to take that away? I also think it's made me fall back in love with the education profession again, just watching the innovation of school leaders and teachers and the resiliency of kids. Like, I'm on a school board, and I was laughing with the superintendent the other day. I'm like, they did not train us in principal school how to deal with a pandemic. Like, no one told us how to do that. They didn't do it in superintendent school either. So
that's true.
Like, none of us knew that this was what was coming, and yet we've been managing to teach kids all year. And while there's learning loss relative to a traditional school year or how we've set ourselves up to be, we've also learned a lot and actually have gained new skills that maybe we can't test. But you need technology, ability to learn and manage ourselves, just being innovative and flexible. Those are all powerful skills for all of us, especially for kids. So it's exciting for me to hear you all speak about that. And I love that. I want it on a t-shirt now. Like, yeah, we're going to have to pivot. I don't want to go back to where we were.
Yeah, I don't want to go back to what we were doing before. It wasn't working for many of our kids furthest from opportunity. And this question about learning loss, which keeps coming up, and there's a lot of question about the use of the language learning loss. That I think it's important to sort of examine, because clearly there are some things that are benchmarks and things that we would have expected kids to get that they're not getting this year. But there's also been all of these things that they've learned that we need to capitalize on and sort of and gain and think of as gains, right? So what are the learning gains during this that we can fall on, and sort of thinking about it in that same way. And so I worry when we get, I think learning loss is really important. The fear on the state testing is it's going to measure the wrong thing, right? We're going to measure the wrong thing. It's going to make everyone feel defeated. What can we measure that's actually going to help us gain knowledge that will help our kids move forward? And how do we do that? I don't know.
One thing that we talked about today about students, one of the teachers, our focus has been on engagement. And so one of the teachers talked about how they have been putting up a social and emotional wheel, and just allowing the children to reflect on their feelings and, what they really want to say about their feelings, and they don't have to share out loud. It's just something that they write down. And what she was really surprised about was that they want to share that. So I think they're more in tune with themselves and possibly better able to express themselves. And I think where historically we have not asked children sometimes how they're feeling, or that has not been like a big, component of things, is we just, sometimes adults just go on thinking that, oh, well, this is an adult thing, and we're handling and we're shielding the children from it. But I think that we need to, make them a part of the conversation, and also work with them on dealing with how they feel about how all of this is going. A lot of times we operate in adult silos away from the children, making projections about how they feel about certain things or how they're going to respond to it without ever asking them anything. So just making them a part of the conversation. We've included them in surveys this year, to see, what do you all think we need to do or continue for next year? What do we need to change? Just making sure that they're a part of that too. It's just not based on what the teachers think needs to happen with them, but actually hearing the children's voices.
And the student voice is very important. Even at my level, I've created a student advisory group. So I have a cadre of children who we meet at least once a month, and they kind of talk to me about how they feel we can best support them during this time. And because school is so different for them, because the social aspect of school is so different for them. Many of the celebrations that we normally have for them are large group celebrations. And of course, we're not able to participate in those. So just getting their opinions and thoughts on, so what can we do to help you guys to feel a part of what's going on here at the school? What kinds of things can we do to support what you are feeling right now in your classrooms? And as Shika said, those SEL check-ins are great for the adults in the building, because we need to make sure that the staff are okay. However, we also need to be sure that the kids are doing okay. So we're doing those kinds of things. And another thing, I think, Susan, that is something that's worth a bigger part of our conversation is one of the things that I think would be one of those things that would someone could consider a plus in a time where, and Megan, you said it so beautifully, this has been such a tremendous time of loss. It's been not just loss of instruction, but loss of life. Every week I pay tribute to those folks who have been impacted by this virus, whatever that looks like, because everybody knows someone who has been impacted. But one of the things that I think could be, if we were looking for pluses, could be, we see children now able to do some things collaboratively that they've not been able to do in the past, digitally, electronically, virtually. So you see this new skill developing, and Shika likes to talk about, and she'll probably mention this at some point today, soft skills, and how kids have to have those soft skills and not just be scholarly with their academics, but they have to have those soft skills that make them productive citizens. And when we think about the pandemic and the number of people who are having to work remotely and collaborate from across the country, you see that this is a necessary skill for not just children, but for all of us to be successful. So when you see that those kinds of things are the result of such an unfortunate situation, you still have to appreciate the fact that something good can come out of us having this new way of doing school.
Yeah, I so appreciate what you both have said about that. Yeah, we need to learn new ways. I do think it's a skill, and I'm not surprised, Shika, that you're saying that as a middle school principal, because I taught middle school, and any people need social skills, and that's those people. So I'm with you. But and I live with one, so I'm reminded every day that that's also true. But yeah, we're developing different sets of skills in our kids. And, I work in an organization that brings mindfulness to schools. And it's been really exciting to see this shift of SEL was always kind of treated as it's on the side and if we have time. And it's really being positioned as a central and important thing for us to be able to tap into our emotions, see how we're feeling, and come from that place. So I'm really excited about that. I'm blown away by all of the work that you are doing just as school principals, and you have this business. So I would love to hear a little bit more about the business that you have and what you're doing there. And again, how you've had the time. If you could bottle that, I'd be all about it. But what brought you to...
Oh, come on, Megan. You do a million things. Who are you talking to? The three women on this panel all work way above and beyond as working parents. So I'm just gonna call true.
And Megan, before we even start talking about business, we have to salute you for the work that you're doing with bringing mindfulness into schools, because that is so important. So
thank you.
Definitely. I'm glad Susan is keeping it real. Welcome to the Workaholic Show.
Yeah, it is the Workaholic Show. I will name that. I do want to hear about your business, but I will say that one thing that I also appreciate that you are bringing student voice forward, and I'm a single mom, and so when you're saying, Tammy, about the little kids and being helpful, I once had to bring my kid to do a walk a campus because he was sick or something, or anyway, he wasn't at school and I was at work, so he came with me, which is what his life has been like. And I had to walk around the campus and just assess what needed to be done from from buildings and grounds people to come in, do we need paint here or paint there? And I just asked him his opinion, and he took over. So suddenly it was him, and I was writing down notes for him. But it was so fascinating to see how he saw that campus, to both of your points, because you both nailed, like, kids see things differently and their experience is really different. And so, like, we were on the basketball court and I saw that the nets were broken, but like, that wasn't like, I don't know, I had bigger issues. I wasn't so worried about that. But he was like, that really bothers me. And as a kid, I don't feel like I'm being seen or supported if I don't have a net in my, or the one that's broken. Like, that tells me you don't care about me. Like, that was his reference.
Mm-hmm.
Or like paint that was at a different level of his height, like I was worried about like big paint and he was worried about like, why isn't there paint right there? Because that's what he sees. Of course, I'm like looking up higher and I'm looking at things differently. So I think for all of these changes, including student voice, is really important. So I just want to put that in there. But now I want to hear about this additional business that you're creating, because I too have I do two things, and so that's why I know it's a lot. But I'm just wondering how that came about for both of you and how you chose to start it.
Well, we actually had been collaborating for some time with one another in the principalship and bouncing ideas off of one another, and also working with other principals in other states and people who had been working with us. So one of the facilitators just talked to us about some of the ideas that we had, and they were like, wow, you all are, doing such great things. Why don't you start consulting too? You all have like a lot to share. And we were like, well, one more thing to the plate. So we started talking about it and got more serious about it. And we birthed Create and Educate. And we've started with literacy, professional development, working with teachers and the leadership team. We've also developed an implicit bias, professional development. So really a lot of it, what we're working with leaders, centers around collaboration and our collaboration framework. And we talk about it some in our chapters of the Women Who Lead featuring school principals anthology that just recently came out, that we are trust mates. And that's one of the big focuses of our book that's coming out after this. It doesn't have to be lonely at the top. And it focuses around collaboration as well. A lot of times in leadership, especially the principalship, you'll hear a lot of people say that, oh, it's such a lonely job, and you only have yourself to depend on. But if you create that space to be that way, yes, it will be that. But if you actively seek out someone who's a trust mate for you and consistently work on true collaboration with someone, it doesn't have to be that way. And we definitely are better together. So that's pretty much how the business was birthed.
I love that term, trust mate. And I don't know that I've heard that before. So I do really, again, I'm going to be stealing all kinds of stuff. Okay. I'm going to be stealing all kinds of like language from you guys. You're also getting quite a bit of love on Facebook. There are folks saying that they've been through your program and how powerful it was. And so I'm the other piece about the literacy, which I'm curious about, is because it's not just literacy, if I understand this correctly. You are really elevating literacy that's more reflective of communities of color and authors of color, and that really having culturally responsive literature as part of this vision of what literacy looks like for our students, that the books reflect who they are and their stories and their experiences. And I'm wondering if you can talk a little bit about that piece of the work.
Absolutely. I can say this, and we made that up to Susan. We just made up trust mate because that's what we were, trusting each other. But yes, you're correct. We actually both have pretty strong literacy backgrounds, and because literacy is so important, and literacy for us, of course, incorporates and includes both reading and writing. And so when we conduct a professional development, it can be specific to what a school or a leader particularly needs. However, one of the aspects of what we do that is a central theme throughout is exactly what you mentioned. We are very, very passionate about ensuring that there is representation in books in classrooms so that children are able to see children who look like themselves, but also because we don't stop there, we also want it to be that other children see children who look differently than they do, because we all matter. And when we were doing the research that we were going to use for to put together the professional development, we both were astonished at the statistics that surround how frequently African American are depicted, characters we're talking about, are depicted in books. And we were thinking maybe these numbers don't look correct. And so we're digging to see if this is actually true. And I mean, we were finding that animals show up as characters more often than characters of color. So
And
it was
Black characters in particular, or all different is it just mostly white characters are
mostly,
overrepresented?
White characters were depicted at least 50% of the time.
Most of the time, or at least close to 50.
Yeah. And then I think for African Americans, it was 10%. Hispanic Americans might have been maybe 5%, and Native Americans was like 1%. Yeah.
Wow.
Asian Pacific Island might have been 1%. It's very low.
It was astounding. And so we were thinking about, like, I mean, we do need to do something about this, because it has to be a different message sent to children when they see kids or characters in stories that look like they look. And because of that, we started to think about, how can we incorporate representation into what we're doing in this literacy framework? Because we know that the key to being successful in school lies in being able to read and comprehend at high levels. So we know this, and we know that the reading and literacy framework is something that we are going to have to share when we're doing professional development. But we need to also make sure that we are providing schools and leaders and teachers with resources that can help them to have that representation in quality literature that you find in a classroom library or in your media center. And so that actually sparked another, this is something else that we embarked upon, but that led us to being able to work with a number of incredible independent authors. And even though as educators, and we talked a little bit with Susan about this yesterday, we're kind of creatures of habit. So we really tend to lean towards those publishers that we are used to using. And so we are used to buying books by certain authors, and that's what becomes familiar. So that's what we do. But as we've been working with these various groups of authors, we've found that there's a plethora of material out there that's very high quality. These authors have done an amazing job of representing. And so putting those kinds of texts into schools is kind of a mission for us, because we want children to be exposed to quality literature, but we also want children to see and appreciate the differences that exist amongst kids of all races. So that's
so important.
Just to add to what Tammy was, I'm sorry.
No,
I was just going to say that the Create and Educate catalog is where we feature a lot of the authors, and we try to open the minds of administrators and school leaders to start doing things differently. Don't just keep with the traditional things that we've always done, ordering from the same vendors. Try to have a more open mind to people that have great things to offer, so that our children are able to better connect to the text, because you have more representation available. So our if you go to our website, www.createandeducate.solutions, you'll find our catalog where you can get access to several different authors that offer these great things for school libraries and classroom libraries.
Absolutely. And there are more to come. So
we'll link your website onto both our website and our
Facebook
page.
Thank you so much.
Link in there as well.
We definitely have more authors to feature because there are many of them out there. So we'll be coming out with our next edition of the catalog that features another set of independent authors that we are promoting.
I'm sure Susan referenced him yesterday, but we interviewed a teacher from out here a couple weeks ago, Mr. Lamada, who's been doing similar work, right? So I think that's really powerful. And I'll say, like, as a white woman, and there's so many white identified people that are educators and also that are in the publishing industry. So I think what you're doing is really important because as a white identified person, I don't always notice, like, it took me a minute to notice, oh, I'm the only person, like my identity is the primary identity that's showing up, right? Like we become so, I don't know, I wasn't aware of it. It wasn't on my radar. And then it was. And as soon as it was, then everything shifted for me. But it wasn't on my radar. So I think just raising that awareness for educators is really important.
Yes, we're looking forward to meeting Mr. Lamada.
Oh yeah,
good. Yeah, he is so fun.
He really is fabulous.
Wonderful. Listen to that episode; it was really good.
Yeah.
Oh, good. Yeah, he is fun, and I got to Susan and I both been watching him through his like teaching journey, and it's just really wonderful to see where he's going. But I think in addition to having representative faces and voices, but also depicting people of color and from different backgrounds in life as they are now. Because I think the other problem that we often have is, like my kid thought so too. He's like, oh, well, Native Americans don't exist anymore, right? And I was like, no, of course they're still here. But he's like, but they don't look like. So like we give kids images of people and of identities that are like a part of a history, but not showing actually the full fabric of who people are. So it's just really important to have books that are just showing kids of different backgrounds being kids and going through life as themselves now, or what their lives look like now.
Yeah. I think that's really important,
historical.
Megan. And I think another thing that is very important, and this is something that we've been fortunate enough to come across as well in our work. There are also children who have disabilities that don't show up as characters. We've met some authors who have work that is really, really good, that the main character is a child who has a disability. So it's important that everyone's represented. So that is sort of why I think it has become such a mission for Shika and I to make sure that we are a voice for those folks who have that material that can serve those purposes.
That leads me to this question. I wanna talk a little bit about this, the coaching entrepreneurs to become vendors, because when we think about white supremacy culture, right, and when we think about this, we always go back to the same vendors, and we sort of by habit buy the same books and buy the same ways, and that ability to break into these larger bureaucratic systems is that when we think about Kendi's book around how to be an anti-racist, he talks about looking at the policies and practices. And this, to me, what you're doing very specifically, creating a pathway to circumvent these practices and policies that are nobody's doing it intentionally. It's just sort of, it becomes, as Megan was saying, until you take the time to look at how it's playing out in the literature and the curriculum and what kids have access to, you don't really see it. You just think, well, these are the books that are available, so this is what we're going to buy. We might buy the one book with the one Black character. And until we create these pathways, which is what you're doing, right? You're demystifying the becoming a vendor for a school district, which Megan can talk a lot more about operations than I can, because that's never been my end, but that is a whole world of crazy. I mean, it's a whole world to be able to help folks navigate. That is like almost being like a translator for the outside world in a way.
And the thing is, Susan, I think, and Sheikah, I know, I'm sorry, I didn't mean to interrupt you, but I think that because we're a society where we have a society of norms, and what becomes the norm is kind of what we go with. And so I don't think it's deliberate or intentional that people don't always recognize that there is very little representation. Now, in some spaces, it's probably very deliberate and intentional.
Yes.
But for the most part, I think it's just been the way that it is. And if you don't know, like I didn't know, and I am a woman of color, I did not have any idea until we started to meet some of these wonderful authors that this society of independent authors even existed. So once you know, then it kind of becomes your assignment to do. If you know better, you have to do better. So that's almost where it started for us.
Now, I do want to say that I think at some point, some things were intentional, because of course we know that when historically Black colleges were created, it was because Black people were not being admitted to colleges. Before Title IX was passed, women were only allowed to go into certain majors. So that's how education became very heavily populated with women. That was one of the areas that they were allowed to go into. And even at that time, it probably wasn't the same for African American women. There were certain women that were being able to, being allowed to go into that. So some of this has been very intentional, especially with the curriculum. And when you're looking at who develops curriculum and who's designing curriculum, and how the curriculum has been, what's in there and what's been excluded, what is, decided that we're teaching and not teaching, a lot of that is deliberate and very much so rooted in white supremacy. So, we do have to be intentional about making sure that all children see themselves and that they're really hearing true history and not some fallacy that somebody wants you to believe is history, or not only a portion of the history. And especially with African American students, not hearing that your story starts with slavery. You have to really hear your true history, and not just African American students too. I'm very deliberate about making sure I look at the demographics of all of the children that are in my building, and I make sure I purchase books that they can all see themselves in. We also have posters up in all of the classrooms that are very representative of every demographic that is in the building, because it's important for children to see themselves in success and not just what may be in a history book from some point in history that doesn't tell your true entire story.
And I want to just make sure we're all on the same page. My not being deliberate was referencing Megan reading a story to her son at home. Your different story. We are in a society where the curriculum is an entirely different conversation that we have to have, because there really is no representation when it comes to curriculum. We have to now, and of course there are characters that are illustrated in stories, but when we talk about curriculum, if we're going to remedy the issues that are there, I think we have to go back to where Sheikah sort of began with discussing what history really is, not the history that we see in our history text. But
our first series on the Awakening Educator, and for this, and Megan was a history teacher, so you're right up her alley right now, and what's really important to her. But our first series was specifically on history for this reason that you're both bringing up, right? And we were able to ground the Awakening Educator because we think that the history needs to be spoken about, not forgotten, and continues to be, you know, part of why we are still living in a white supremacist culture at this time. So
this discussion is, it brings a few things up, because I think I 100% agree. We need to understand our history. Civic education is woefully under supported in schools. And we see what that looks like with our past president, right? Who just didn't actually have a sense of history at all. And the different access to information and basic information about what is true in this country is not shared within this country. That's become abundantly clear. And we need to work on that. So we have a lot of truth telling and educating of adults and children around what this country was founded on, and the impact of that. So I think that's crucial. And I guess I was trying to like hint to, as a white person, white supremacy is hard sometimes to see. And so like I can know it, and I think that I know it, I think that I'm aware, and then I will get caught. I'll get caught out all the time, like, oh shoot. So I think it requires ongoing conversation, like this one, and in your classrooms and schools. Shika, what you were saying too, and Tammy, you mentioned it also, is also having these signs of your culture being represented in your school is so powerful. And I don't know if you're familiar with Zaretta Hammond's work. If you aren't, she wrote a book called Culturally Responsive Pedagogy in the Brain.
Culturally Responsive Teaching in the Brain.
Culturally Responsive Pedagogy in the Brain.
No, Teaching in the Brain.
Teaching in the Brain. And basically what she lifts up is that when kids' cultures aren't represented, or even worse, if there are like microaggressions or active aggressions against one's culture when they're in the classroom, it sends us into that fight, flight, freeze mode, and our brains shut down. And so not only is it important for us to learn to create like safe spaces for kids where actually and we need to work with the adults a lot on this, where they're actually creating safe spaces for all kids' identities and cultures to be in the room, but also we're working against ourselves when we don't. And I think most educators, whether they're intentionally causing harm to kids or not, like if we're not doing our own work, we're gonna, stuff's gonna happen. But I think most educators show up into classrooms and schools with the desire to be supportive, with the desire to make a positive impact on kids' lives. And then what a heartbreaking thing that so many of us then unintentionally are causing harm by not being as culturally aware or responsive as we need to be, and not creating classrooms that are as supportive as they need to be. So I just think it's so powerful that you're intentionally creating opportunities for kids to see themselves from whatever their background is, wherever they are.
Well, this is also making me think of your book too, Megan, Your Three Eyes, which is, the reflection, intuition, intellect, and I had it all in my head. Insight. Thank you.
Yeah, that's my third eye.
Insight. And so thinking about, her book really looks at this leadership framework from that perspective, and that we're always having to revisit all three of those, and that we have to do our own personal work and insight and reflecting and having insight into what's going on for us. But then there's the concrete steps of like, okay, so we see that this is this issue, and you've created through your business this pathway to try and bring vendors directly to the schools, which is a concrete way to override the ways in which those systems come into play. And I think sometimes we end up in process a lot, like in the reflection and talking about, especially as white folks, like, oh, I don't want to be, I don't want to contribute to this system. But really, we have to actually create opportunities for real collaboration, real partnership, and actually financial opportunity for our Black educators, for our Black authors, for folks to be able to actually get into those systems that have historically pushed them out. So I just wanted to bring back your book, because as we're talking, it really reminded me of the work that you did.
Yeah.
Well, and I'm glad too that Megan mentioned that as a white person, white supremacy is hard to see, because I think more people need to be comfortable with making that statement, because I think a lot of times when we want to pretend like it doesn't exist, or things are so much better than, whenever, it's because of what you just stated. Nobody wants to see that as a reflection of what, a white person was whenever at some certain point in time. So I think that's good that you mentioned that, and being transparent. And like you mentioned, Susan, collaborations like this, we have to come together and have conversations, because it really makes people think about what the real problem is, why we really haven't gotten to the root of it, because certain things we're afraid to address.
Yeah, it's scary, right? And I think, but you get used to talking and it feels less scary. I can only say that from my point of view. But I think as educators in particular, we're kind of trained to feel like we have to know everything and have to have all the answers. And so I think it's a real occupational hazard for us when we also are humans with all of our failings and all of our biases. And we need to be able to have permission to not know, to make mistakes, to be reflective and learn from them. And to be able to say that, and to kind of be taken off the hook of like, oh, okay, not that we can have permission to like say and do things that are harmful, but like, okay, I made a mistake and I can like take the risk to enter this conversation, and learn. Because I mean, truly, I'm not super proud to say it, but like this revelation of like, oh, most books that include African-American characters are about slavery. That was a newish revelation for me as a white woman educator. And I'll say newish, like maybe within the last 10 years. Like, and I've done equity work for a long time, but it just was not on my radar that was a thing. And then as soon as it was, I was like, oh shoot, right. And then you can see every other culture is having the same experience, right? That we're kind of pigeonholing everyone into different kinds of periods of time or caricatures, and we're not actually creating an opportunity to have a robust discussion and an opportunity for kids to see themselves in the books that they're reading.
And the opportunity looks differently now than it did, say, when I was a teenager. There were books about like Mildred Taylor. I don't know if you're familiar with her work or not. James Baldwin. There were some authors who were writing books, but many of those books were about a time that was not so long before, when they were struggling with civil rights and, fighting for a position in the country. So the books still, even though those books are available, they aren't representative of the time that we are living in now, where you can get a book that affirms who a child is. We have one author who, her book is I Am Brown, and it's a beautiful story about a little girl who is going through a awakening because her classmate called her Black, and she hadn't ever heard that before because her parents told her she was a brown princess. And so the book is the story of her coming to terms with, sometimes people call you things that you're not, because when she searched her crayon box, she looked at the Black crayon and she looked at herself and said, this doesn't represent who I am. She met an elderly white gentleman in her journey, and he said he was white. She looked at a white crayon and said, you're not white. So
I'll look this book up and link it. We are getting very close to our time being up. It's been it went so fast. It's unbelievable.
It did.
It's been such a powerful conversation. And we did have a guest on our show. Megan's former middle school student was our guest on our show, Crystal Glick, a few, maybe 6 months ago at this point. But anyway, she wrote a book so we'll connect her with you, because she's an independent author, and she wrote a book called Pumpkin Learns to Read. And so I think that's, one of those things that bringing them forward and celebrating your stories. But we have only just a couple of minutes left, so we also want to highlight you have a chapter in your book. We want to give you an opportunity before we close out to just really share. Yeah. To be able to self-promote, because that's an important part of this, is like, how do people, how should people reach out to you, and what are some things that they should know about you?
So we have had the amazing opportunity to be a part of an anthology with some other amazing women leaders, and we are featured in the Women Who Lead School Principal edition. And the chapter that I wrote about is centered around instructional leadership. What I wanted to bring to light is something that you mentioned. Sometimes as educators, we think that we have to have all of the answers. And a lot of times in education, there's this thinking that if you didn't come from a certain background, that you're not necessarily going to be a great instructional leader. So I really go through some essential components of instructional leadership, and just really kind of talk about my journey of growth in that area, because it's an area that you can grow in and that you can learn. So because we're tasked with so much as school leaders, I just wanted to give some school leaders some information about how they can, be great instructional leaders and lead their school forward and be successful without the feeling of, if you didn't come from a certain background, you're not going to be good at it. So there's certain components that you can put in place that I just brought light to in my chapter that I wanted people to be aware of. And we'll be talking about that through the virtual summit as well. Every Tuesday and Thursday in the month of March, all of us that are part of the anthology will present on our chapters. And you can go to our website, www.createandeducate.solutions, and you can purchase the book as well as register for it's a free conference, free virtual conference. So Tammy, you could talk about your chapter.
Sure. I wrote on culture and climate. And the reason that I selected culture and climate is much like Shika. I felt like I had a story to tell that could help other educators as they are on their journey to creating a climate of excellence in their schools. And so I talk about some of the obstacles that were in place for me during my first few years at my school, and how we were able to weather some of those things by developing a strong system of collaboration and trust, and not being afraid to have those hard discussions. And sometimes those difficult conversations were exposing the toxicity of the culture that was existing in the school at the time. And as a result, we became a more unified group, and the culture is now one that is becoming a culture of excellence. And we've established some protocols and procedures that were put into place so that those things that we consider sacred to what has to happen at our school in order for us to all stay in a safe space with one another, we know that we can do those things by observing those protocols that are in place. So I, again, thought that I could share that journey and how I was able to capitalize on the folks that were there to support me through helping the school to work through all of those toxicities. And I'm very transparent about some people left and others stayed, and we were able to build a team that is now on our way to being that school of excellence that we desire to be.
And we also highlight how we are turnaround principles, in that our schools went from non-performing or unsatisfactory to moving up 2 report card grades in 1 year in my case, and 3 report card grades in 1 year in Tammy's case. So our
That's
schools,
huge.
worked really hard. Our staffs worked really hard, and we were just really proud of them.
Yeah, that's so important. I mean, I was a turnaround assistant principal, and I think being able to capture those stories of what's possible, and quickly, frankly. And it's a lot of what you both named, which is like having a vision, also sticking with it, being willing to lose some people along the way, because that's part of the journey. But also just having those common norms and a vision for kids that knows that they can do more than what they've been given opportunity to experience so far is huge. You're both so inspiring. I truly do want to I'm the worst host because I always get caught up in a conversation and I forget to watch time. So thank you, Susan.
And usually Megan's the one catching us with time. So this time I was pretty proud of myself that way. Hopefully we gained some new guests because it seems like you have some fans out here. If you like what you heard, listen to some of our other shows. The Awakening Educator podcast is available wherever you listen to podcasts, Spreaker, iTunes, Spotify, iHeartRadio, all the podcast spaces. And we have 2 years worth of shows by now, and we're super proud of them. And we've had some amazing guests, and you are definitely in that amazing guest list. And it's just been a really wonderful, powerful conversation.
Thank you so much.
Yeah, thank you both so much. And I look forward to learning more about what you guys are going to do. This is huge.
Well, thank you all for having us on. We appreciate the invitation, and we've enjoyed speaking with you all this afternoon.
Yes, definitely.
And we'll definitely continue to follow your work as well and commend you all too.
Class is dismissed. Wasn't that fun? Susan and Megan are always happy to greet you on the next episode of The Awakening Educator. Connect with us on Facebook, Instagram, YouTube. Education is the foundation for a brighter future. Open your eyes to The Awakening Educator.
You guys are getting so much love on Facebook here too. Awesome. We love you. You are, the comments are coming.